Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast. You're listening to season 1, episode 3, hosted by me, Donnie Chesson.
And me, Peter Allen.
So what are we talking about this week, Pete?
Danny, this week we are talking about the ethics of human-centered design.
This is starting to feel a little bit like a spin-off from our last week episode.
Yeah, I think it is actually, Danny. So last week we talked about human-centered design. We kind of finished up our conversation talking about the three lenses of desirable, feasible, viable, and we talked about sustainable. In terms of human-centered design, should be definitely helpful towards the planet, but we didn't really get into human-centered design should be taking account of all the humans, both the group of humans you're designing for and maybe the ones that you're not designing for too. So avoiding unintended consequences.
So what are some of the unintended consequences of human-centered design?
That is a great question. I mean, my mind right now is thinking about maybe the participants in a human-centered design activity. And back in episode 1, we talked about co-design and including the people that we're designing for in our design activities. I think an unintended consequence of working with the people you're designing for is you can end up, that by definition, kind of including them, but excluding the people you're not designing for. So you're at risk of having great big blind spots. Maybe that comes down, how big that blind spot is and what it is, and whether you're aware or not. It might come down to what you do before you get to that point where you're including the people you're designing for. Like I said, my mind is in the people that are participating in your activities and trying to be aware that you're automatically excluding the people that aren't in the room with you. What about your thoughts?
So I think it might help our listeners if we kind of ground it in an example, right? So
definitely.
Let's pretend that we're trying to create a solution for dog owners, people who own dogs, dog parents.
Dog owners. Okay. Yeah.
And so we going through our human-centered approach, we get to know dog owners. We try to understand what their pain points are, what their joys are, why do they own dogs, what are they struggling with, what do they do well. So we do all of that discovery work to really understand what it means to be a dog owner. And from that, we realize, okay, these are some of the solutions that would really, if we identify some pain points and we say, okay, if we can really find some solutions to these pain points, we could really elevate what it means to be, the experience that you have as a dog owner.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go through creating a solution for that, what we're leaving out in that approach is how might the solutions we create impact cat owners, or how might the solutions we create impact people who don't have pets, or people who can't have pets because of allergies. Right? So there are these other groups of people that are, that exist, right? Like the world isn't made up of one group of people. And then I think the challenge becomes, well, if we start to consider everybody, then we end up considering nobody. But then if we only consider one group, then there's a bit of an inequity that's being created.
Okay. I'll take your dog owner example. and maybe make it a little bit maybe even more concrete. So we both live in Auckland, New Zealand, and in this city there's some rules around where you can actually walk your dogs and where you can let them off leash. And you are a dog owner. I hope you don't mind me sharing that with the listeners. I'm not. So this is interesting. So in Auckland, at certain times of year, you can walk your dog on the beach without a lead on, and other times of the year, or day, I should say, you can walk your dog on the beach, but you have to have it on a lead. So that seems like it's maybe a solution that takes into account the needs of both dog owners and non-dog owners. Would you agree with that? I'm just kind of using a slightly more concrete example that we could play around with.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay, good, right, okay.
Only because, so the rules are actually in summer months, you can't have your dog on the beach at all before 5 or 6 p.m. I forget. Mm-hmm. But as both a beach lover and a dog lover, which mm-hmm. it's quite conflicting for me, right? Because if I want to go spend the day at the beach, it means I've got to leave my dog at home. Or I can only go to the beach after 5 o'clock.
Okay. One or the other.
Yeah.
Okay. Where does the ethics come into? So if we were design, maybe let's keep going with this and see if it works. Well, if we were going to redesign the rules, regulations for walking dogs on beaches in Auckland, and we were using human-centered design, and we were bringing, making sure that we were creating something desirable, feasible, viable, sustainable, and ethical. What would we? How might we go about doing that? And how would it be ethical, especially?
I don't know if in this example it's an ethics thing, right? Because it's not unethical to say you can't bring your dog on the beach at a certain time. I think it's more maybe equitable.
Okay.
So it kind of feels like as a dog owner, I don't get the same access to the beach that a non-dog owner would.
Okay.
Or I have to make that trade-off.
Okay, got you. So we've got, we want to be ethical and equitable. What would be an example of, so that this example doesn't bring up questions of ethics necessarily. Is there something as a dog owner or a group of dog owners where that question would come up?
That question of ethics?
The question of ethics, yeah.
I don't, I'm trying to think. I don't think there's an ethics example there.
Okay.
In my view, unless you see one.
Nothing's jumping to mind. Maybe let's wind back then. Let's take a few steps back from the little tangent that I've taken us on. That's something we're noticing, isn't it? Back from the beach, back to dog owners and non-dog owners. So that's a great example. So we could be designing. So what you were saying was, we could design something for dog owners, and if we did that, we might unintentionally exclude or do something to the detriment of non-dog owners. That's where before it took us to the beach, that's where we were, right? Okay. I'm trying to think of another area, another example.
Of two groups that we might be designing for.
Yeah, or maybe one group where we're a group that we're designing for, or maybe a need that we're designing for that a certain group of people have, and maybe it might be helpful if we can think through, or you could help us think through what steps we might take to keep these two questions in mind the whole way through our design thinking or
So
human-centered design approach.
here's a bit of an example, and it's
Yeah.
something that drives me nuts. So,
Okay.
I'm petite.
Okay. Yeah.
So one, there's an issue with finding petite size clothing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you do go into a store and you're like, and then you realize, oh my God, they carry petite stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get very excited, and then you go to wear the clothes you want, and then you realize all the petite stuff is hung up on the top shelf.
Okay.
Now, I understand the logic of, look, most people are average height and they will be, so most stores are designed where things are placed for the average person.
Okay.
But then if you're petite, you're not in that average bucket. But now you've put the clothing that's meant for a person that's vertically challenged, and you put it somewhere and they cannot reach it.
Okay.
But you've done that to make it more accommodating for a larger group of people. So it makes sense if you're looking at it from a numbers perspective, but if you're looking at it from a petite person's perspective, what about that example?
Okay, that is a very interesting example, and I just need to double check that is a genuine example. See, that is something you experience.
Yes, that is something I've experienced.
Wow. Wow. Okay. You mentioned something, a word there that doesn't make sense to me in that context. You said it's logical, but just doesn't seem logical to me. Although maybe, looking at it from maybe it's only logical from an averages point of view. And what that's making me think is this idea of, I think you just hinted at it. If you design for everybody, then you design for nobody. So we're setting up this kind of dilemma, this tension that we might have it as designers or human-centered designers of, we can't design for everybody because we'll end up designing for nobody. But at the same time, if we design for somebody specific, even a specific person, then we run the risk of excluding absolutely everybody else. What do you think? And this idea of ending up designing for the average is an example of trying to design for everybody. So one approach that I've taken, and it's kind of one of my favorites, is to take a dimension of either behavior or an attribute of somebody or a group of people and kind of look for extremes of that. And try and understand those, really extremes of behavior. So an example that comes to mind for me is doing a project once to do with television viewing and a particular television product. And one of the dimensions of television viewing is watching television lots or not watching television at all. So what we decided to do as part of that project was find the people who watch television lots and lots and lots. Like they appeared to have their television on literally 24 hours a day. And then at the other extreme, there was people who had a television product but never actually watched it. They'd literally never switched it on or connected it to a network. And we went and spoke to those two different groups of people to understand them. What would your experience be like in that shop if maybe that approach had been taken? And what difference would it make? Maybe kind of staying with this equity ethics lens. How would it impact other people if the shop or where those petite clothes were situated in the shop suited you better?
I mean, I think it certainly creates a more equitable experience, right? Because
Mm,
if I were average height, I can go to a shop and and easily access and pick up the clothes I want to try on or I want to have a look at.
mhm,
Whereas in this example I shared, I have to now go get someone else to help me get down the thing that I want to look at. Now I have to tell this person what size I am, and so there's all of these barriers that it puts up for me
mm,
that my average height friend that's shopping,
mhm,
he or she can go around the store freely
mm,
and pick up things that they want without asking for help.
mhm. So uh, that store
It
experience is basically making you uh, do a lot more. There's more of a burden put on you to get what you want. You have to invest, put more effort in, more energy in. Sounds
hmm,
like more emotion in to getting the thing that you need. And to let the audience know, when Danny's telling this, we're both kind of smiling. To me, you're smiling because it seems, well, because of your experience. It just seems bizarre that this situation exists. But thanks for bringing it to my attention. Yeah, it's just weird.
yeah, it's I mean, for myself, I mean, like, look, it's not like this wounding, traumatizing
Hmm,
experience or anything, but it's just
hmm,
something that, I've experienced it in a couple of shops, and I just sit there and go,
hmm,
why would you put the petite size clothes up there? Like, the whole reason I need them is
hmm,
because I can't reach up there. Um, so it seems like a very, and then when I start to kind of think about, okay, well, how did those clothes end up there? And it's because, if you think about a store and the spacing, and you want to make the most of the space that you have, space is limited.
hmm,
You want to target, the largest part of the population you can. So when I said earlier, it makes logical sense. That's what I meant,
okay.
in that,
Okay.
most people that are going to work in this store are going to be average height.
Hmm,
So let's appeal to the larger part of the population. It makes
hmm,
sense.
hmm,
um, but in doing that,
hmm,
you're creating, and I think the whole point of this conversation today is
hmm,
to highlight that fact that sometimes we get so focused on one group of people
hmm,
and doing something that benefits them that we
hmm,
might be actually creating problems for other people, not
hmm,
purposefully, but
hmm,
so I guess the question to come back to is, when we think
hmm,
about human-centered design,
hmm,
what is the obligation that, as human-centered design practitioners, what is the obligation that we have to the collective human
hmm,
experience?
hmm.
Like, what is the obligation to the collective and the specific group that we're solving a problem for, and how do we balance those tensions?
Um, my kind of immediate reaction to what's our obligation is, I think our obligation is to both the individual and the yeah the what I guess the largest group of humans we can think of, all humans. But then that's easy to say, and yeah, really difficult to maybe follow through on. I suppose the first thing to do is to be uh, aware up front. And when I mentioned earlier the project we were working on, that television product, at that stage in a human-centered design process, for me, you're kind of pausing and thinking, and you know, I guess opening your mind and being as curious and open to lots of different possibilities as possible. You're thinking through, well, who are these different groups of people? Um, you know, what maybe starting off with the largest group of people you can think of that what you're doing may have some sort of impact on. So switching from the TV example to your store example, maybe the store designers could might have started thinking about if it was, well, think about all the people that might come into the store and buy the clothes in that store, every single person, and keeping that in mind, narrowing it down then to what are the specific groups of people that we think might be most interested in our clothes, or who we want to buy our clothes, and always bearing in mind that the wider group. I don't know, maybe it's a very deliberate decision on in those stores that they will do that, put their clothes in that situation and make you invest that extra effort. But maybe not. Yeah, so it's a very long way of saying I think we're obliged to consider everybody, and I think how you resolve that tension probably changes from specific project to project, specific need to specific need. What about you? What do you think?
As you're kind of walking through this explanation, the thing that comes to mind for me is I wonder if this is where, how we in the design process, we ideate, and then we come to creating a prototype, and then the idea is we get the prototype in the hands of people to see how it works. So I wonder if when we get to prototyping, should we be prototyping or testing the prototype with people beyond the initial user group? So let's say that, going back to your first example of the dogs on the beach rules in Auckland, what if those laws were tested with both dog owners, non-dog owners, and cat owners?
Yeah.
To get a feel for, well, how does that experience work across groups? Even though we've created this solution with this group in mind, let's test it out to see, have we actually made the experience better for this group, but in doing so, we've made it worse for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great practical way of finding things out. I suppose, that human-centered design is a creative problem solving process, but I think that's because it's a learning process, a cycle of learning, and by prototyping and testing, that's a great way of learning stuff, finding out what's desirable for dog owners, and what's not desirable for non-dog owners, and vice versa. Yeah. So I think, we that would be a great approach, is you would do that. I think, though, maybe especially with things like rules or legislation, it brings to mind this idea that we need to be really aware of, which is when you're testing things early on, it's quite often it's in a form where you're just getting feedback on, is this a problem or not, using some sort of low fidelity prototype or mock-up, and often it's done, or I tend to do it in a conversation with somebody, which isn't always going to be in the context of their kind of day-to-day lives, and what's definitely true about human beings, to a greater or lesser extent, is what they say they will do, or what we say we're going to do as human beings, and what we actually do can be quite different. So when it comes to, say, testing legislation about dog walking, and you go out and prototype with people, you might get a whole bunch of answers. And then you'll go and implement, a working prototype. So you'll choose a beat, for example, and you'll try out some new rules. And what you might find is that the feedback you get from both groups of people is completely different to the feedback you got by just testing that idea by, I don't know, showing them the sign of a beach that's open at different hours for dog walking and dog walking. So maybe developing that idea a little bit further if I was going to be doing that and testing a prototype new dog walking hours on the beach, I'd choose a beach, and I would be really aware of who it was that was using that beach on a normal day-to-day basis. I'd probably be doing some research before I did the prototype to find out who those people were they dog walkers, were they not dog walkers, trying to understand them. Then when I changed things in prototype form and started to get feedback from people and maybe observe people using or not using the beach, I would have some sort of baseline understanding for not just our group of dog walking or dog owners, but our cat owners too, or every kind of possible group of people. That's the way I'd start to tackle it. Yeah, some awareness of this idea of people doing things different to what they say they would. Some awareness of the people who I'm trying to help, and the people who might be impacted by the design of the service in this case, and then prototyping in real life, I guess.
I think you touched on something interesting there, because I think we naturally tend to test out ideas with people, right? Like, oh, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Or if I did this, how would you know? And I think you're right. Like when we talk to somebody about something hypothetical, their response is very different than when we put something in someone's hand. So I think this speaks to the importance of creating a prototype that people can experience, because it's very different to say, hey, how would you feel about if dogs were allowed on the beach anytime? I'm not suggesting this. If dogs are allowed on the beach any time of day off leash, you'll get very different answers than if you ask somebody to show up at a beach where dogs are running around all the time, right? Because it's one thing to think about an experience and it's another thing to experience it. So I think this is the importance of we shouldn't just be testing something in the ideation phase. We should constantly be putting the thing we're creating out there for people to touch, feel, experience, and give us feedback on.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I guess that process for me, it's kind of never done really. Be constantly looking to see how what you've designed and then delivered and created and sent out into the world, constantly checking to see that it, in this case, in this conversation, is it still ethical and is it still equitable, or is it generating equitable conditions? Is it does it still fall within an ethical boundary? This is again relating to our three lenses we talked about last week of desirable, feasible, viable. Again, thinking about this specifically of ethical and equitable. I'll kind of be open and transparent. Say those two words hadn't really been front of mind before. I suppose it's specifically, it's not that I would design something that isn't equitable or not, it isn't ethical. But I think, again, just like sustainable was in our last conversation, and two extra kind of words to be really aware of, and naming things helps us think about them, and in this case, do something with them more. What perhaps for you, though, it's been more front of mind and part of your human-centered design process, Danny?
I think, sorry, this is kind of going away from your question, but
Okay.
you hit on something that I that sparked a thought for me, right? So last
Sure.
week
Yeah.
we talked about sustainability being part of viability. So we still have the three lenses, but kind of building on what do those things mean. And we said sustainability is about, well, is this solution viable in the long run for the environment?
Yeah.
And I think when we think about equitability, I think that falls into that desirability, right? Because if human-centered design is around things being desirable for humans, then that equitability needs to be there. Like we shouldn't, we should be making sure that what we create doesn't put some groups in a severe disadvantage compared to other groups, right? Or shouldn't create a burden for one group.
Okay.
But I think where I'm having trouble with that is that really practical? Or does every solution kind of advantage one group and disadvantage another group?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is a great question in itself. When you were talking about that, what came to my mind was first do no harm, which it's the Hippocratic Oath, isn't it? Doctors first do no harm. As designers, we don't have such an oath, and it maybe comes down to personal preference or situation or values, and sometimes those values are compromised by the situation that somebody might be in. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is it, you've got me really thinking now, what is that? Is it possible to is it always possible to create something that has only a net positive effect? Feels like we might be dipping into a philosophy class here.
Yeah, and we are, but I think these are the things that, like, there's never going to be a right, wrong, or there's never going to be a concrete answer to these types of questions. Yeah, but okay. I think what's important is that when we are engaging in design, that we are mindful and considerate of these things. So I think it goes back to what you said earlier about awareness, right? Like being aware. If I have designed a solution that the average height person can reach, what does that mean for the shorter people? If I've created an ideal solution for dog owners, what does that mean for cat owners? I think it's just taking that moment to consider that.
Yeah. And what in your experience, what practical things can we do as designers to, I guess, maintain that awareness?
I feel like you always catch me out on these very deep. Okay. For those of you listening, we don't practice the questions we're going to ask each other on this podcast.
Well, it's a conversation.
It is the conversation. So what can we do? What practical things can we do as designers?
Yeah.
So I think one is, once we understand, I think part of our empathizing work, and we understand who we're empathizing with, I think we also need to go a step further and go, okay, who do those people interact with? right? So that's like a simple thing just to bring awareness to the fact that that person doesn't, that, dog owners don't exist in the world isolated by themselves, right?
Yeah, okay.
Who
Okay.
else are they? So I think
Okay.
that's one thing.
Mm.
The other thing I mentioned earlier is, when we come up with an idea and we have some sort of prototype people can engage with, testing it, not just with those people that will be using it, but those people that interact with the people that are using it.
Yeah,
and you don't have to make that overly complicated. It could be, one or two people. Like if this, those are the two things that come to mind, which is driving me nuts because I like things in threes.
Okay.
So you'll have to come up with a third one, Pete.
Or the third, okay. Well, I guess maybe it's an extension. The third bridging idea maybe is, as designers or human-centered designers, we try and visualize things and try and draw pictures of things or create pictures of things, and I like to do that. And I think as you're talking, literally drawing some sort of map or diagram of, well, who's our group of people, and then who do they relate to? Who are the other people in their lives? And that does both things. That can help us have both things. Is looking at that picture again and again, having it in our workspace, for example, we can see who's the people, and then who are the other people, and that that helps us see the relationships, but also keeps us aware of the dog owners and the non-dog owners, and the cat. Let's not forget the cat owners too.
I just want to comment, when you're talking about the relationship, so part of human-centered design is actually systems thinking.
Yeah.
But I think in practice, we lose sight of that a little bit, right? And maybe this is the way work is organized in organizations, or maybe this is because we get into a role and we get kind of hyper-focused. But part of being a design thinker is to be a systems thinker and understanding the impact we're having on the whole system.
Yeah, that had occurred to me during our conversation as well. And I guess maybe this comes back to your question about, is it ever possible to do things that don't have an unintended consequence? I still don't think we'll ever have an answer to that. But if you start to think in systems, then you can start to expand beyond just your user and just the user and the non-user, if you like, much more broadly. So you'd be thinking about the dog owners, the non-dog owners. You'd be thinking about the council people who clean up the beach, the council people who empty the bins, maybe the people who make and sell the pooper scooper bags, the ice cream delivery people, the children on the beach. I suppose, yeah, no, I'll stop there. You could go on and on. You could go like, well, the tides, the weather, all these different things that you could take into account or should take into account when you're thinking in terms of systems that interact with each other.
So what does this all mean? We've talked about a lot of different things.
We have. Well, what this all means, well, for me, I'm going to definitely pay more attention to, not that I do a lot of clothes shopping, I don't particularly enjoy it. I'll pay a lot more attention to where the clothes are and think about that from other people's perspective.
Or even just the height of things, Pete.
Okay, just the height of things, full stop. Okay. And yeah, I'll use that as a kind of a mental shortcut to, well, am I considering everybody when I'm putting together, in my case, a workshop where we might explore a design challenge? Is everybody included, invited? Yeah. How about you?
For me, I think it's and this is not a finite answer. I think for me, it's how do I keep wrestling with this idea of creating equitable, sustainable, ethical solutions. Because I think the same way we try to balance desirability, viability, feasibility, those three things fit in those lenses. But how do we keep that top of mind, and how do we keep that balanced? And how do we do that in a way that doesn't cripple us? Right? Because we still have to create a solution. We still, our jobs are to make things even a little bit better than what they are. So how do we not let the massiveness of those things, weigh us down? And that's a bit of a tension that we have to balance, right?
Yeah, nice. Well, yeah, and I'll borrow some of your takeaway as well. And so last week I added sustainability into viability. This week I'm going to be adding ethical and equitable into my desirability lens. But completely agree with you. We need to not be. We need to have the positive intent towards all of those things, and at the same time, not be overwhelmed with the potential weight of them. Good chat, Danny. Thank you so much for helping me clarify my thinking once again.
It was good chat. It was I felt like it was a bit of a heavy chat as well.
Well, sorry, you go on.
I was just going to say, because I think we tried to take on a really big topic in a really short amount of time. This is one of those topics that I think we could probably fill a whole season on.
A whole season, yeah. Well, maybe our intent is to just get people thinking, to bring people's awareness to something rather than to, solve something in a once and done conversation, I reckon. So
at the very least, I hope this conversation leads to other conversations for our listeners.
Yeah, me too. Great stuff.
All right. Great chat this week. Thank you for listening. And we will be back next week with our 4th episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.